All right, here we are at the University of Mount Olive in North Carolina, United States. Welcome to all of you who are attending this little program on cyberspace, wherever you may be. You're looking at a YouTube video presentation of a strategic assessment of the John Deere Company here in a Master of Business Administration program, which shortly will be conducted by members of the MBA curriculum here at the university by some unusually talented students here in our MBA program. With the completion of this program, they anticipate to complete their curriculum and receive their MBA degrees. So this represents not only a lot of work on their part, but hopefully a very happy time in their lives. So with that, I'm going to turn this over. Let's see, we haven't actually selected an MC, a person who will coordinate the proceedings. Will it be Ollie or Joanna or Lynn? Somebody tell me. Ollie, looks like it's going to be Ollie. Joanna?
I can do it.
Okay, Ollie, why don't you? So I will introduce Ollie Ryberg, who will introduce his teammates and coordinate the rest of the presentation. Ollie, it's all yours.
Good morning, everyone in Business 410. We are the John Deere team, and me presenting is Ollie Ryberg, and I have my teammates Lynn Bergman, Johanna Anderson, and Lindsay Burton. And first off, we'll start off with some simple information and the background of the company.
Lynn?
So John Deere founded the company in 1837 when he invented a new type of moldboard plow. So in the coming few slides, there will be a lot of information, so I will only go over the most significant key events shortly, and then if you're interested, you can go back and read the rest of it later. So in 1848, John Deere moved to Moline, which enabled them to use the Mississippi River, which meant water power and transportation. In 1869, the first branch was established, and in 1875, the Gilpin sulky plow was introduced, and this was a very important product of Deere's because it was the first successful sulky plow, and it was superior compared to competitors. Next slide.
Yeah, I promise not to interrupt too much, but there's another item here, and I think there may be on the next slide that I would have highlighted in yellow, but I couldn't do it on your slides. But it's the introduction of electric lights into the Rock Island factory. It was about the first time that that company was able to put lighting into their factories in the evening. So you can imagine what that did to manufacturing productivity. And throughout this program, we'll see that Deere has introduced a number of innovations in the way it produces its products. And of course, the result is a lot higher productivity, higher capacity utilization, and as a result, lower cost, even though its claim is to high quality. Deere has been a very efficient producer, and I promise I won't do this very many times.
So in the beginning of the 1900s, William Butterworth succeeded Charles Deere as the new CEO. During his time as a CEO, annual sales grew from 4.5 million to 61 million. So So that's significant, and the company became leaders in harvesting and tractor business. In 1918, John Deere entered the tractor business and purchased the Waterloo Gasoline Engine Company, which was producing the most popular and well-performing tractor at that time, the Waterloo Boy. And in 1927, they introduced their first combine. Next slide. In 1956, Deere started operating more outside the US, which is significant because today John Deere is operating worldwide with operations in 35 countries. And in 1958, Deere introduced the new Industrial Equipment Division and John Deere Credit Company, which provides financial options, started operating. Next slide.
Now, this is the other slide that I wanted to comment on, and that is 1979. Cotton is a pretty important crop, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well. A 4-row cotton picker, you can just, from the name, you can imagine just how efficient that machine is, how much it can do at one time. And the unique thing about this and similar products is that it not only increased the capacity of the machine, but the machine itself started doing work that labor was doing, manual labor was doing, which made the machine even more efficient. Later on, we'll see that I think there's now a 6-row cotton picker. We'll see it come along later. But here we are with a much different approach to efficiency. Instead of efficiency in the factory, we now have efficiency on the farm itself. But this machine was a major step forward and made the industry much more productive as a result of what this and similar machines could do.
In 2000, John Deere acquired Timberjack, a world-leading producer of forestry equipment, and Waratah, a forestry harvester head manufacturer, and it made Deere the worldwide leader in the forestry business. John Deere also opened a new tractor plant in India, which is a very important market to get into, and we will discuss this several times in the presentation. In 2006, John Deere Tianjin Works, a new transmission factory, opened in Tianjin, China, and China, just like India, will be mentioned again because it's such an important market in the future for Deere. In 2014, John Deere's Intelligent Solution Group further advanced productivity by integrating technology with equipment, by using products that collect, transfer, and store and analyze data. Customers can meet the needs of the growing world population. And lastly, in 2017, John Deere acquired the Wirtgen Group, the leading manufacturer worldwide in the road construction industry. Next slide. So this slide provides some basic information about John Deere's current CEO, Jan C. May. You can read this later if you're interested. And Johanna will discuss his significance to your company later on in the presentation. Next slide. So this is the mission that John Deere is promoting on their website. We are committed to serving those linked to the land, helping to improve living standards for people everywhere. And you can see their core values here as well. So keep this in mind when Ollie now will discuss John Deere's mission with Abel's model. Next slide.
So we all know what the Abel's model is. It's basically what defines and builds up the company's mission. And these are 3 parts: are the segments of the society, which they try to serve, the unmet needs of the society, as well as the competencies for satisfying these needs, which we will now go through. Next slide, please. The segments of society to be satisfied. These are basically different groups of people working with landscaping. This can be everything from the golf course management to landscapers and gardeners, contractors, farmers, foresters, as well as the government and military. The market's unmet needs. These are what the customer needs and expects to get from John Deere. And these are strong, durable machines, assistive computer technology, GPS systems for the machinery, and machinery and technology support. Next slide, please. And this is done through the competences for satisfying needs, which John Deere has in place. A lot of these are pretty straightforward, such as research and development, efficient dealer systems, product support, and steel fabricating technologies. But two that are pretty significant that I will just talk a little bit about are the John Deere Intelligent Solutions Group, as well as FarmSight. So the John Deere Intelligent Group basically creates the advanced technology products revolutionizing the agriculture. The team designs, develops, tests, and launches products that improve farmers' productivity and profitability by equipping farming machines with intelligent powers of robotics, computer visions, artificial intelligence, and more. And these empower farmers to make and act on informed decisions. John Deere FarmSight is basically a program that is a complete solution for farms. It combines farms' equipment and then with John Deere's technology offerings with customized services and solutions that can help farmers easily gather and access data about machines and the farm fields. So intelligent automated equipment brings more precision, convenience, and uptime to the operation on the farms. As well as in the picture, you can see one of John Deere's shatter boxes, which is basically where John Deere have a box where people that are working on the site can go and leave feedback while they're actually working. Next slide, please.
So these are John Deere's served markets, as they mentioned, and we'll get more into in a little bit. Agriculture machinery, construction machinery, forest machinery, engines, drivetrains, and lawn care equipment, and they can be found in construction, forestry, landscape, stuff like that. Next slide. So the firm's mission, this is their mission now, which basically aims to increase farmers' productivity. So right now, which we have a picture later on in our presentation, it shows the distribution centers across the world, and they do this for high-speed turnover. So their goal is to produce and service parts within 48 hours, so that way they can maintain their high order fill rate. And so in the future, what they're gonna try to change to do is their John Deere Farm Forward 2.0, which is basically revolutionizing agriculture one plant at a time, and that focuses more on technology. Since everything is shifting more towards a technological world, that's what they want to do as well to make their tractors better. And they also are expanding more into construction, so that means moving more into China, India, and Africa, and exploring unmet needs and future profit potential markets. Next slide. So we don't have to watch this video. You can watch it if you want. It's like less than 3 minutes long, but it basically, you can see there's like diagrams up on his screen, and it's kind of hinting more towards a technological future and like how they're going to use technology in their tractors just to make things easier and more productive within their tractors. Next slide.
So for the current lines of production and services right now, they have their agriculture department with tractors, loaders, farm equipment, utility vehicles. They also have the lawn and garden equipment, the lawn tractors, riding mower attachments, tools, lawn care. Next slide. Then they have the construction with backhoes, dozers, skid steers, wheel loaders, and articulated dump trucks. And then we have the landscaping and ground care with mowers, tractors, worksite equipment, utility vehicles, tools and attachments. We have the golf and sport turf, golf course mowers, special equipment, precision mower equipment, field and venture equipment, tractors. And then we have forestry with big machines. They have full tree equipment, cut to length equipment. Then they hit for next slide.
An interesting comment can be made on this slide. The one on the left is a machine powered by a gasoline engine, a V4 engine, whereas the one on the right is powered by a diesel engine. And so when we get to lawn and turf maintenance equipment, particularly the ride-on lawnmowers for lawn care, which I guess we saw on the last slide, those are a consumer product, of course, and they're made quite differently with sheet steel as opposed to plate steel. The one on the right, on the other hand, is a much heavier piece of equipment, as you can see. So Deere has two broad lines of equipment. The major line is powered by diesel engines and has very heavy steel. The other one is for consumer markets, and it's lighter weight. It has sheet steel and internal combustion gasoline engines. It's important to recognize that, because not only are they made different, but they're marketed differently as well.
Then we have their engines and drivetrains. They have industrial diesel engines, just like Roni said, and drivetrain components, generator and drive engines, and marine engines. They also have government and military solutions, power system, military M-gators, Navcom, and they also have customized M-gators for all different types of needs. And then they also have the John Deere Finance, which offers John Deere credit, equipment loans, and offering leasing options. Then we have a line of future products that they want to have in the future, and they want electricity fueled machines and variable transmission with electromechanical power split, and autonomous electrical tractors and semi-autonomous tractors, autonomous drone sprayers, artificial intelligence, and see and spray technology. So they have a lot in the future that they want to do for the environment. So we have the environmental assessment here for economic. So the economic sector, John Deere serves both the industrial sector and the consumer sector, like we know. And the different products can be divided into these 8 different industries. So agriculture, residential, golf sport, commercial construction, forestry, government, military, and landscaping, which we pretty much have already covered.
So this part starts the sales. Looking at the sales, the light blue portion is the United States and Canada. You can see they're pretty solid markets, and this is where a lot of their revenue comes from. But as you can see, as it moves more into the years, so 2019, it's growing outside of the United States and Canada, and they need to start focusing on this so they can expand internationally more into bigger markets. Next slide.
Yeah, I guess last night I sent you a modification of this slide, but it doesn't seem to have come through. But if you just add the two segments, for instance, in 2019, 15 billion and 23 billion, you get what, about 39 billion. And if you take 15 and divide it by the 39, you get about 38 or 39%. If we go all the way over to the left and do the same thing, 11 divided by 28, lo and behold, we got 39% again. And so you've got about a 60-40 split between domestic and international sales. And when the sales go up, quite remarkably, here in 2013, for instance, If we add those two, we get something like, what is it, 36, 37 billion, a little bit more. So if we take the 13.5 and divide it by 37, what do we get? We get a smaller proportion. So the growth, when Deere has a big growth year, it hasn't been due to international sales. Here it's only 36 compared to almost 40 in the more normal years, but 64% in the domestic sales. So this is one slide. Again, if we have the percentages, and I think when we post this on the what, the website, the Moodle, that's it. I'll put the slide that shows those percentages because it demonstrates that Deere has been far more dependent upon domestic and what you might call Western, perhaps, or conventional markets than international, and that's a theme I think of this case. Has Deere been adequate in its approach to international markets? And based on this one chart, we might conclude that in fact it hasn't been real effective in getting outside of its traditional markets. And if it's going to grow as an international competitor, it's going to have to figure out how to do that better. Okay, let's move on.
So this is just another chart showing the regional breakdown. So you can clearly see that it's still mainly in the United States and Canada. And then there's the Western Europe, Central Europe, Latin America, and then Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand. And then the pie graph just again shows that how important North America is for their sales. And then they should think about expanding into other countries, which is what we'll get into later.
Yeah, and how unimportant the emerging markets are. So if we add to US 72 in this pie chart, 11, that's 83, and then Western Europe of 6, we're up to 89, or almost 90% of Deere's sales are from what we might call conventional markets. This pie chart, I think, is a little exaggerated, but not much. But it certainly does bring out just how important it is for Deere to reach beyond its traditional boundaries.
So some concerns for the foreign market, to if they're going to expand our trade agreements, just what's going on with politics and things, and then sovereign debt impact, capital market distribution, and also the demand and pricing for heavy equipment. In some areas, there could be difficult growing and harvesting conditions, and that would also impact the demand for a heavy machine like what John Deere sells. So they need to think about that as well. And then also the fluctuations in foreign currency exchange, which if you go down to the next slide, and then the slide after that, this shows the currency exchanges, the US dollar compared to the Chinese yuan, and then the euro. And then the next slide also shows, I think it should be, yeah, India, the rupees, and then the South African rand. And this is just important so they can see what the comparison is and how they're going to price the products in these markets.
What's your takeaway here?
Like, you need to look to see how much the US dollar is worth in that country so they can see how much it's worth so they can price their products.
Yeah, last night I sent you a note. I don't know if you were able to look at it, but clearly the US dollar in these two slides, as well as the two previous slides, is able to buy a great deal more foreign currency, in this case, rupees and rands. That may make it good for American buyers of products that are made in those countries. On the other hand, customers in those countries find it more difficult to purchase product made in the United States, right? Because it takes more of their currency to buy a dollar's worth of product, in this case, of course, agriculture or construction or forestry equipment. But with the exchange rate trends as they are in these slides, you can see that it's more difficult for customers in those markets to buy products made in the United States. And there are two ramifications of that. First of all, it just may be difficult for Deere to export into those markets. Simple enough. It's harder for the customers to buy. Secondly, there's an incentive in a large market, which could be India, for instance, for Deere to install a manufacturing facility in those countries, because then the exchange rate does not make it more difficult for customers to buy the product, unless, of course, the components in those products have been imported from the United States, which raises the cost of the machine. So these are very important charts. We're not interested just in the shape of the chart, but what their impacts on Deere's ability to do business in those countries is.
All right, so now we're going to look at some trends of the contributing national markets. We will have a fairly bigger focus on the US, India, and China for fairly obvious reasons. Next slide, please. So I will try to go through these fairly quickly and have a lengthier conclusion after them, just because this presentation will be fairly long. But the biggest takeaway from this slide is that China is the biggest market according to GDP PPP, and is growing, as well as India will be a future market that will be extremely important as it is growing at a rapid pace. Yeah, we can just go through that one more.
I'm sorry, did I go too fast?
No, you can go to the next slide.
I did.
Yeah, so here we can see in smaller countries, we have Russia that's on the increase, which we fairly, it's difficult to see the difference between the lines here as they're both blue, but Argentina is the one on the bottom and Russia is the one on top, where they have an economy that is growing. We can go to the next slide.
Okay, maybe very quickly we could go to the prior slide for just a minute. It's very important for those of you who are watching this video for the first time to appreciate the y-axis, okay? Here, the top number on this chart is $40 trillion, whereas when we look here, we see growth, but lo and behold, the top number is $5 trillion. So you want to be sure to appreciate the range of values in these charts. So here we see growth just like we do on that chart, but the size of the economies that we're looking at is much different.
Yeah, so that is why the focus is bigger on the three countries I mentioned, as they are a much higher percentage of the world's economy and also the ones buying there. So here in the GDP per capita, we get a little different picture where we see that US is on top, and this will mostly impact the buying power of the individuals in the country, and such as they will probably have a higher percentage of people buying lawnmowers and stuff like that. And this also explains why John Deere right now has such a big sales percentage in the US, as the GDP per capita is very high.
Yeah, I suppose that this slide also is relevant to those consumer products that Deere makes. Deere doesn't sell much in the way of ride-on lawnmowers outside the United States, but GDP per capita is an indicator of consumption potential. And of course, we can see that the United States and has been, until the coronavirus anyway, performing very well in the consumer sector, which has benefited Deere in selling ride-on lawnmowers. I doubt with the coronavirus, as there will be as many ride-on lawnmowers sold with the kind of unemployment we've been hearing about in the news. Today, virtually, there was another report, something like 26 million people in the United States unemployed, just a dramatic effect.
So here, once again, the same picture is painted, where we see that Canada is highly above the other countries, and should, to be fair, be on the other slide with the bigger nations. But once again, this just shows why John Deere has such a high sale percentage in Canada and the US, because they both have a high GDP per capita. The unemployment rate is fairly even in all countries, but just as Derek said the other day, since the Eurozone has a higher rate, there could be more people available for factory jobs and etc. In the Europe, which would suit John Deere, who is trying to get a higher international presence.
The remarkable item here is Brazil, I would imagine.
Yeah, of course, since they have a hard problem right now with their government, and there is a very messy country to be making business in.
Yeah, it's noteworthy that General Motors has pulled out of South America just because the South American economies, generally speaking, are quite weak and unstable. And so, if you're looking at an asset-intensive industry like Deere's and like automotive, it's not the sort of an environment that management wants to make a large capital commitment.
So this is a fairly interesting slide, as we see that once again, China and India are on top. So what does the gross national savings rate actually mean? Well, when the saving rate is high, they have more liquidation for spending on infrastructure, such as road and other things. And this is where John Deere comes into the picture. And this once again shows why China and India will be so important markets now and especially in the future.
Highways, construction of all sorts, residential, commercial, industrial, government, municipal. So infrastructure can grow in those countries when you've got that kind of liquid capital available to be invested, as Ali just said.
And here we also have the gross national savings rate for the minor countries. And what's interesting to look at is once again Brazil at the bottom, not looking to make their way up either. It's just not a good place to be making business in right now. Here the personal savings rate, and a rising personal savings rate we can see in the last few years means that people will have more money to spend on things such as personal lawnmowers, etc., which will affect John Deere probably positively, as they can sell more discretionary items to people.
Such as ride-on lawnmowers.
Such as ride-on lawnmowers. And here we see the inflation rate. And once again, what's really important in this slide is India. The Indian inflation rate is widely increased. And what we don't know about India is if all the actual facts we get are true. Because India is a bit of an economical enigma where there's a lot of corruption. And even though the economy and the population is growing, they have parts of high inflation and employment. And it's difficult for businesses to make a business in India just because there's a lot of corruption, as I earlier said, and to make a business in India and you can sell your products, you basically have to bribe your way into the market in the country. So if you look at India, it looks like a geographical market you want to get into, but it's really hard to justify being in it.
Quite just a you know, a non-technical observation, but you don't really need to be an economist or a technician to appreciate that gray line, do you? I mean, that's really been something. And another thing to appreciate is that these graphs were prepared by the International Monetary Fund, a very reliable, respected organization, but appreciate that the actuals, you know, the actual results for 2019 still may not be confirmed yet. It takes quite a while. So we can talk about actuals from 2018 and prior. And we can see that prior in 2018 and prior, we've got a much different picture than the forecast. The forecast is for orderly, non-erratic performance, which is unlikely to occur in the real world, right? If we were to go back to 2002 and look at the IMF's forecast, they'd probably look like these from 2018 forward, flat lines. But it turned out the lines weren't really flat after all, were they? And what has always impressed me is just how, for lack of a better term, out of control some countries such as India and Brazil have been. And we can see that, again, you don't need to be a technician to see that that gray line is out of control. And here we see Brazil, the blue, Russia, quite surprising. And what's remarkable is that it ran out of control, and the IMF has been, I suppose, cautious in the way it's projecting that Russia gets back in control. We'll see if that happens or not. But if you're an industrial firm manager, for instance, the folks running Deere and Company, you've got to ask a question. How do you feel about building a plant in India or Russia? And the answer is, maybe we should try somewhere else.
So here we have the United States interest rate, and as you can see, it's heading downwards, and a dropping interest rate means that bigger investments will seem more attractive to firms and could lead to more sales on John Deere's part, as some of the machinery and equipment they make are very high cost, and firms could more easily justify buying these products at these times.
Absolutely.
So here's basic conclusion with the most important takeaways. That China is the world's largest economy, and it's been growing fast lately. And the only thing that seemingly could slow it down is the COVID-19. But anyway, it means that this market is big and is somewhere where Deere should try to gain market shares. India is also rapidly increasing and will be a big market of the future. But once again, as we talked about, there is a lot of corruption going on, and spikes of inflation makes it a geographical area that maybe Deere should think twice about before entering, more than they already are. The personal savings rate seems to be increasing in the US, which means that in the future they might be selling more to personal or to the average Joe, such as lawnmowers, etc. And as well as the economy in the future will, however, be, or the personal savings rate as well as the interest rate promises futures of more sales as the interest rate is decreasing. The economy in the future will, however, be greatly impacted by the ongoing pandemic, so nothing can be taken for granted at this moment.
Absolutely correct. You know, there's a little indirect impact of the saving rate, and as consumer wealth increases, or as it was increasing, that also improved the prospects for golf courses and leisure of other kinds, but especially golf courses. So the saving rate doesn't really affect golf courses per se, but people playing on golf courses more and patronizing everything from country clubs to public golf courses increases the demand for that golf course maintenance equipment that Deere makes. And some of Deere's equipment is much different than ride-on lawnmowers. Those are big machines, and so they generate a lot of revenue per unit compared to the consumer product. And so there we have a little indirect effect, but it's a real impact. Okay, here we go with markets.
So this is the markets. John Deere, this is their geographical markets. You can just see from this graph is all the places they do business in. It's more than those ones listed. Those are just a few of them. Next slide. This is their network of distribution centers around the world. So this just, the dots show where the centers are, and this aligns with their goals today, which align with fulfilling orders and serving parts at a fast time. This is how they do it, so they don't have to ship a bunch of things. It's more conveniently located, and they can get to their consumers faster. Next slide. So this is just more explaining the divisions across the world. I'm not going to read those. You can just look at them if you want in your spare time. Next slide. This is the headquarters around the world. So they have one in the United States, and then in Germany, and then in Brazil. And that also just helps them cover more areas of the market, so they don't have one and they're not able to fulfill all their orders and necessary needs.
Kind of interesting that the European headquarters are in Mannheim. That's kind of like Chicago. It's it certainly isn't Eastern Europe or India or somewhere around the breadbasket of Europe, which is the Ukraine and Russia. But Deere, even in its international exploits, has stayed in the mature markets, even when they build their headquarters.
So these are the population trends. Clearly, the United States is bigger than the other ones. If you go to the next slide, that has China and India in it, and you can see by 2023 that India will catch China, and they'll have a higher population. And this is due because China only has the one-child policy, so it'll begin to slow down, and they also are too busy working, so they can't focus their time on having children, whereas India is a growing market. So that's something just John Deere needs to watch for in the future.
Yeah, India doesn't have a one-child policy, does it?
No.
And nor does China any longer. That ended about 5 years ago, I guess. But the birth rate hasn't changed because, as Lynn says, the young population in China has some different cultural characteristics, not least of which is everybody's busy.
So this is the age market trend of the farmers. As you can see in all the different countries, it's beginning to like rise. So the age is going up, like over 55 and older. There's not really as many young people getting into farming. It's more like family farms. So John Deere needs to change their marketing and engineering strategy to be more friendly for older farmers. And also John Deere needs to notice that, like, as the farmers get older, their farms might be turned over to their family, or they might be sold into agribusiness, or they might just sell them to a corporation, and then the corporations will take over. So farmers have more leverage and bargaining power to negotiate with businesses. So this will change John Deere's market dramatically.
Yeah, and their marketing priorities for sure. I think another thing, I may have sent you a note last night, but if you're Deere and you see the folks who are operating this machinery getting older, I'm old. I'm an old person. And once I went to a party my wife and I did, and we parked in the people's parking lot where we went to visit. And when we left, I backed up, and doggone it, I backed right in to their stone fence. And that was a fender bender. And of course, you don't want to do things like that with a tractor or a combine. So if you're Deere and you know your operators are getting older, this is where we want to put things like power steering, lots of air conditioning, comfortable seats. Right? It's not as easy for me to stay sat in my office chair as it used to be. I'm not sure why, but I certainly appreciate a more comfortable seat as I grow older.
So this just shows how the farmers age is higher than the median age of labor force, which is again something they need to look at for, like what you said, for the seats and the air conditioning and just how they design their tractors.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then farming is also more of a male dominated industry, as you can see, just males outrule females in farming. So that's another thing that they need to focus on.
You know, it's kind of interesting. I put the edited version back in. The graph on the right definitely shows that the farm managers tend to be male. No question about that. But one of the, I think this is a great slide for a number of reasons. We see over on the left the orange, the dark green, and the light green. The dark green is the industrial or manufacturing sector. Of course, the orange is services, and the light green is agriculture, which is what we're talking about. And if you take a look, you can see that in a number of countries, particularly those that are not so highly developed, the right bar, the right side bar, the female bar, is higher than the left bar. And that is because agriculture in underdeveloped nations, frankly, is occupied, or the labor force is composed of females. They may not be the managers, but there sure are a lot of females in Southern Asia, for instance, next to the far right bar on farms in Southern Asia. So where do we see the males in the largest proportion? And we see that in the middle dark green bar, right? In manufacturing and industry. And there, the title suggests that manufacturing is occupied more by males. And then, of course, when we get to the service sector, such as in Latin America, oh boy, there we see a real lopsided gender distribution. So I think that the takeaway from this rather interesting graphic is that the gender distribution of industries can vary quite a lot. Again, you take a look at Latin America, the one on the left, you can see that in agriculture, you've got more males working, as Lynn suggested, but you really do also in manufacturing. Then you get up into services, and of course, a lot more females. If Deere wants to market effectively in these regions, in these markets, it has to take these kinds of things into consideration. not just in the dealers and the way they they do business with dealers, but in their media advertising too. So depending upon the cultural differences in gender distribution, Deere's advertising to be effective to the family farmer or to the farm manager is going to have to recognize these cultural differences. It's kind of an interesting situation. Okay.
Here we see, as a result of the average age of farmers getting older, that we see a steady decline of the numbers of farms, with the average farm size increasing. And this is both due to the fact that the older generations are selling their farms, as well as technology is allowing the farmers to have a wider control over bigger areas.
This is just a tremendously powerful slide because what it says is that Deere is going to have to be able to deal with a much more powerful customer, a customer that buys fleets rather than individual machines, and therefore can drive a harder bargain. Deere's not dealing as nearly as often with an individual family farmer as the manager of a great big agribusiness that buys a fleet of machines rather than just one. And when they buy a fleet of machines, they're going to demand everything from customer service to lower prices.
This once again just drives that point even more, that the US major crop acreage is increasing even though the numbers of farm are decreasing, which once again gives the buyer more power, as they will stand for bigger parts of the sales, basically. These few slides just shows that the industry is growing, and in places where maybe you wouldn't expect them to be, such as Eastern Europe and Russia, as well as in the US.
That's a lot of corn.
That's a lot of corn. So the crude oil prices per barrel. So how does this affect Deere? Well, cheaper oil means that there's no incentive to make fuel efficient engines at the same rate. It will be easier to get gasoline and diesel. So the incentive is basically moving away from making fuel efficient engines to rather being focused on power and creating powerful engines. And this is once again just driving down the point of gasoline and diesel prices that are decreasing, and especially now in these times, they are as low as they've basically ever been in a long time. The US steel prices are fairly important to Deere as well, because steel price is, next to labor, their biggest cost. So a steel price that is going upwards will most likely give them a less profit on their sales.
So this is just a conclusion of the previous slides. So again, this just reiterates the fact that the growing age in farmers means Deere needs to monitor this closely and make the changes necessary. This is going to affect their markets and their marketing strategy majorly. And then Deere should also look into the expanding markets, like India will soon surpass China. Next slide.
Yeah, I think on the edits, we expanded this slide to point out the importance of agribusiness, professionally managed farms, the importance of those items in the way Deere goes to market and does business with their customers, and of course the very significant growth of India as well as China. So I think when we post these slides on Moodle, we'll put back the the modified slides because we had a number of other conclusions here. Too bad that slide was removed.
So these are the consumer buying intentions. This also influences the sales for John Deere. So basically this graph shows how confident consumers are in buying a product. John Deere obviously has expensive items and products and machinery. So this is important to look at because if the buying intentions are low, then people don't really want to spend a lot of money. And they're definitely not going to spend it on a $500,000, $250,000 machine if they're worried they're not going to be able to pay for it or make their money back with it.
Yeah,
And then,
if they're consumers, which of Deere's products are affected here?
then it'd be like the lawnmowers and the,
Yeah, the lawnmowers. That's a consumer product. So this chart relates to ride-on lawnmowers. It can also relate to small tractors that are purchased by family farms, but probably the product line that's impacted the most by this chart, which is favorable, would be ride-on lawnmowers, the consumer product.
and then this just shows the interest rates over the years, which is how willing people are to borrow the money for the products.
Yeah, don't forget now, these are not the actual interest rates, are they?
No,
What are they?
it's just with the down minus. It's just
These are well, you picked this up from the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey. And these are consumers' expectations for interest rates. And so in the most recent survey, consumers expected interest rates to go up dramatically and just recently. So if you're John Deere, how do you exploit this? Well, the answer is you tell the consumer in your advertising, interest rates are going to go up pretty soon. You better buy now, right? Because if interest rates go up, then your time payments, your installment payments are going to be more than if you buy now when the interest rates are lower, right? So a smart marketing guy or gal at John Deere would take advantage of this in the advertising strategy. Okay, who's up now?
That would be me again. So these financials are actually very interesting, though they at first glance might not seem so. And what we can clearly see is that Caterpillar is the biggest, and their financials are very good looking as they have a high return on interest, a high return average on equity, as well as a revenue that is outstanding. AGCO is the smallest, and it might not be that odd since they're just in one industry, which would be the agriculture equipment. But what is most interesting is that Deere and CNH are very similar in the product lines. So there's a lot of rivalry in between them. And if we especially look at Deere, we can see that they have a very high leverage at 73%. As well as CNH, they got one at 80. So what this means, this is first place is something negative, but could also be used as something that's positive and an advantage of Deere. Because if they manage to get their leverage down to at least 60%, they could then focus on one market.
Ollie, we lost you. We can't hear you, Ollie.
You can't hear me?
Not sure what happened.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
audio left us.
Am I good now?
While you fix it, I'll sort of finish up for you while you check your controls. What's particularly interesting here, aside from the things that Ollie pointed out, is that, for lack of a better term, big is better. You can see the Caterpillar, the biggest company, has the nicest numbers. On the other hand, As Ollie pointed out, there's a lot of similarity between Deere and CNH. Quite remarkable, their rates of return and return on investment and return on equity are almost identical. Their leverages are also fairly high. But then we look at little AGCO, and AGCO's the smallest company, and it's got the smallest financial returns. So, you know, you don't want to get too far with a generalization like this, but it's not out of line to say that bigger is better. And this reflects on such things as scale economy, the ability to exert pressure on suppliers when you're buying raw material, and so forth. So the big shots in this industry tend to do better than the little ones. Ollie, are you back? Are you?
I hope so.
There
Can
he
you hear
is.
me now?
He's back.
Oh, that's great. So what I was getting into is the leverage part of Deere versus CNH. So if Deere would manage to get their leverage down to, say, at least 60%, they could then focus on one market and kind of attack CNH in that market. Because CNAs also have a high leverage, which means that if they didn't get it down at the same point, they would have a very hard time to defend themselves against John Deere, and Deere could then steal parts of their market shares. So this is actually an opportunity for John Deere to change the balance in the industry.
Good point.
So I have divided the BCG matrix into two parts, one that focuses on products and one that focuses on
Lynn, get a little closer to your microphone, please.
I have divided the BCG matrix into two parts, one that focuses on products and one that focuses on countries. So this is the product BCG matrix that I have created to illustrate Deere's portfolio. Like you can see, agriculture is an important star/cash cow, and I should probably have divided this into two parts. Traditional agriculture is something that John Deere is very good at, but this is a mature market that might, so that might be the circle we see in the graph now, and then what will arise in the future is precision agriculture, and that could be added as a circle in the left part of the question mark area. And I have added some graphs to illustrate which of the circles have more or less significance. So if you switch slide.
It's impressive to me that that question mark area, the ventures, is, you know, the financial services might even be considered a cash cow. It's certainly not something that's new or a new business. So for those of us who are looking at this for the first time, somebody might just wonder, you know, is there anything there in the ventures? In fact, there are, but they're not so apparent that Lynn put them in this diagram. And certainly Deere needs to focus on this area of new products.
So these graphs illustrate that agricultural demands will keep growing because our population is growing. And here you can see the difference in estimated demands for different crops. And this may affect which machines Deere choose to especially invest in. Next slide.
Okay. I would have appreciated a comment about these two. We're in 2016 and 2022, right? This is where we are today. Yeah? Okay. So where's the action going to be in this particular time space that we're in?
Wheat and cotton.
Yeah, yeah. And far more than, say, soybeans or sugar or even corn. So, you know, again, Deere needs to be, and of course, Deere, in fact, has developed some remarkable new machines for harvesting cotton. So Deere is aware of this, and so Deere has developed high volume cultivating and harvesting machines. But in the cotton harvesting, I think you'll probably later on show us some machines that harvest the cotton, roll it up into a ball, wrap a plastic sheath around it, and so that it won't get wet, and leave it out in the field for the trucks to come pick up later. So Deere needs to be very aware of just where the demand is growing. And what strikes me as especially important here is that between 2000 and 2016, the industry grew about 6% per year. Now we're looking at less than 4. So if we're going to enjoy rapid growth and high sales, we're going to need to pick up on these segments of the market that will enjoy faster growth than the others will. Very important to identify those. Oops.
And in these graphs, we can see that construction equipment is expected to grow. And like I mentioned in John Deere's background, they just acquired the Virgin Group in 2017, which was the leading manufacturer in worldwide road construction. So they should be set up good for this demand, but these graphs might not be quite accurate. Trump and other governments have decided to invest more in infrastructure because of the coronavirus. So the infrastructure projections may become higher than they expected in 2018 when these graphs were made. Next slide. What we see here is a relatively well-balanced portfolio, but we need to look at the countries in the matrix more closely. For example, China and India, which are very fast-growing markets. That's why they're so high up in the graph. They're pretty small for John Deere in market share, but they will be very important markets. And I will speak more about this if you could switch slide, please. So this slide tells us that the world's population is growing both in size and affluence. And we can see in these graphs that the developing countries have economies that are growing much faster than the developed countries' economies. So gaining market share in, for example, India and China could be real opportunities for big new stars. Next slide.
Okay, but I just want to make a quick remark that these last, this slide and the one prior, I think these are exceptionally well done and really focus on an important issue. Lynn, I'm very impressed by what you did here.
And in these slides, we can see again that China and India are growing faster than North America and Europe, but North America and Europe are still two very big and important markets. It's just that India may be even bigger in the future. But overall, I think that the country BCG matrix is pretty well balanced because the developed countries where John Deere has large market shares in could serve as cash cows for investments into the developing countries, which are the question marks. Next slide. And here's just a conclusion of what I just said. So next slide.
These are Porter's 5 forces. So to start with competitive rivalry, we rated this as high because there are multiple competitors, which you can see these are just the top 10 competitors, and they're all fighting for the top spot by trying to offer competitive advantage like differentiation and low cost. Next slide. So bargaining power of suppliers, we rated this as moderate because they're massive consumers in steel and rubber, which I listed the suppliers for those, and it allows Deere to have some negotiation power just because they do buy a lot of it to manufacture their big steel and rubber tractors. Next slide.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the largest steel supplier in the world is ArcelorMittal, which is why I keep adding it. And of course, United States Steel, which is another real big one, actually larger than U.S. Steel, is a steel company right outside of Charlotte. I've got a mental block on their name right now, but you know, the point is that yes, bargaining power is moderate because, in fact, there are so many steel suppliers all over the world that it's pretty easy to get steel, even though it accounts for such a large portion of the cost. Steel is a commodity. Whoops, sorry about that.
So bargaining power of buyers is high. Consumers, if they're buying an expensive product, then they want a high return on their investment, and they also want the best and most reliable equipment, which they are willing to pay more for if they know that it's a good product. And if Deere isn't performing up to the high standards, there are more consumers can easily switch, because there's so many competitors that if they're not performing up to their standards, then consumers can just go find another
Supplier.
company to go with.
Yeah. And of course, we're not just talking about consumers, are we? Okay, we often talk about consumers in five forces, but these are not consumers. These are agribusinesses and forestry concerns and construction contractors. And there's a little issue for those big companies, those big customers. It's called switching costs. If those companies have a big fleet of Deere equipment, they have big fleets of something else, replacement parts. They also have mechanics that are familiar with these machines and know how to maintain them. So if they want to change to CNH, for instance, yes, they certainly can if Deere doesn't perform. But in order to make that switch, they're going to have to incur costs, aren't they? Not just to get the repair parts in inventory, because they got to keep their machines running, but they've got to train the mechanics. Now, CNH and Deere and AGCO are more than willing, if you want to switch to their machinery, to send their people out to that construction company or that forestry company or that agribusiness company and train their mechanics. Delighted to do it. But nevertheless, there's a cost, not just to get the machine, get the parts, but the time required to train those people.
The threat of new entrants is low because it's a major capital investment. It's basically a high entry cost to get started, because to be able to produce those large products, they have to have a lot of steel, a lot of rubber, a lot of manufacturers, and that just is a high cost. And looking at the market as a whole, it's already has such high competitors that is it really worth it to try and enter this market when there's such established brands already in it?
For sure.
The threat of new substitutes is also low because it's, again, you can't really replace heavy machinery. This is a product you need, and I don't really know what would come along that could take its place. It's a specialized product in a specialized market, which makes it hard to have substitutes for.
What's the substitute?
I don't know what would be the substitute for.
I put it on the slide last night for you.
Oh.
Right? That's the substitute. And in some countries that are not developed, this is still out there. It's being replaced pretty fast, but The point is, as Lynn says, there's really not a substitute because the only thing you can do is get a mule and put a plow behind it.
And
You
this
didn't
is
look at the edits I put on these slides for you last night, did you?
well. Ollie told me this morning to send most of the
Yeah.
slides back.
Okay.
So this is just a graph like summarizing the 5 forces, and then on the next slide is the conclusion.
Okay.
So high rivalry is going to pressure competitors to use low cost strategy. Deere's trying to use a hybrid generic strategy, and looking at the countries to expand into, that they want to expand into India because they're growing fast, and they also are a market that's not really tapped into, and focus less on Canada and the United States because they already have strong, solid markets.
Okay, but why do we do the 5 forces? What's the purpose of the 5 forces? What did Porter tell us the 5 forces are for?
To have what competitive advantage and see a strategy.
Profit
No, 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 no,
potential.
no, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Can
Profit
anybody
potential.
else on the team help us out here?
Profit potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the 5 forces tells us what the profit potential of an industry is. For those of you who are watching this video, you better know that answer because it'll definitely be on the test. We need to know what these models are for. That's what you've come to this course to learn, so you can use them in the future. And of course, we could prepare this this slide for multiple countries. So we'd have these 5 forces down the side, and we'd rate them from 1 to 5. But here we'd have the United States, here we'd have India, here we'd have Russia, here we'd have China, and so forth, because these 5 forces differ between countries. So, but on an industry-wide basis, which is what this chart is trying to show us, the question is, you know, what's the profit potential of this industry, and what pushes the potential profit of companies in this industry down? Why do we need to know that? Because then we can form strategy to counter and respond to those forces. And Deere, of course, has done a great job at responding to buyer power. As Lynn has pointed out, they've got locations all over the world to provide repair parts, because the one thing people who own this machinery want is to keep that machinery working. And if the machine stops working, they need to get that repair part and get it working again, because in this industry, for sure, time is money. Rivalry is very high, and if rivalry is high, there are just 2 ways to deal with it, and that's low cost, so you can get your price down, or differentiation, so you can get your price up. And Deere uses a combination, as Lynn has said. But what do you
It's
guys
Lindsay.
think? Where's the highest priority, low cost or differentiation for Deere?
You call Lindsay Lynn, just so you know.
Anybody?
Both.
Yeah.
They're hybrid.
It's differentiation though, right? If we have to choose between low cost and differentiation, Deere is famous for having all these extra features that
Yeah, and a high quality.
Sure. So farmers, contractors, loggers, they'll pay more, but Deere's got to back it up. It's got to really have superior quality. And certainly if buyer power is high, Deere has got to make it so that the buyer will compromise that power in order to get Deere's equipment. But if we just look at the size of these things, we've got 1, 2, and maybe 3 out of 5 forces that push profit down. So this is certainly not the easiest industry to make a profit in. Okay. So you may want to change that slide, right? Because we don't see anything here about profit potential, do we? We see marketing priorities, but we don't see comments about profit potential. And the 5 forces are meant to reveal profit potential and priorities on strategy to respond to those forces that push profit down. Okay.
So here's an industry life cycle graph I created for John Deere. Precision agriculture has started to replace the traditional agriculture. So the traditional agriculture is in a mature market, and the precision agriculture is in the embryonic stage of the life cycle. It is similar with how electrically driven machines may replace diesel engines in the future, but this technology has not advanced enough yet to actually do so. And construction is a rapid growing industry, like I have already told you, and the strategy for forestry should be intended to protect its market position. Next slide.
This is a great slide.
So here we have the critical success factors, and these are the factors that make John Deere successful. Metallurgy, diesel engines, technology innovation, research development, GPS system, distribution channels, customer service. Just to mention some things about this, John Deere has been well known for the high quality diesel engines for a long time. They make their own drivetrains and diesel engines, and because of this, they can ensure high quality and rather than buying it from other manufacturers. And this enables them to also build and custom fit engines for their products. And then research and development, like much time is spent on research and development and creating new innovative ways for the agriculture industry to prosper. And also their GPS systems. John Deere has very well-developed GPS systems, which are one of the best and most accurate systems on the market. And these systems help farmers to track and monitor farming and harvesting. Also, customer service. John Deere has always been known for excellent customer service, and recently they added a new system called John Deere Connect Support, and this system is very well developed, and with this they can deliver excellent aftermarket service as well. Next slide.
Just before we move, very interesting, the picture you chose for critical success factors, particularly with regard to technology and research. Look at the tires. Look at the tires on this machine. 3 of these monster tires. Why do they have 3 tires on each side? That's 3, 6, 9, 12 tires. 12 great big tires on this tractor. What's going on here? These machines go over all kinds of rough terrain. They bounce up and down. They're really heavy. At the end of the day, if the terrain is rough, these machines are trying to tear themselves apart. And so this particular machine is meant to offset that risk with this very wide rolling gear on these tractors. And you know, what an engineering accomplishment this was. So I just was very impressed by the picture you chose for
Thank you.
critical success factors. It's a great selection.
Right, so moving on to the capabilities analysis, we're going to look at some financial trends of the year. And what's the most important and is going to dictate all of these are the drop in net sales that happened in 2015, 2016. And this was due to a severe downturn in the global agriculture sector. It was severe enough that Deere announced layoffs of more than 1,000 US factory employees. And operating profit from its agriculture and turf sales fell 30% in the third quarter compared with the earlier year. And the primary driver in the decline was the net farm's income due to a slide in the commodity prices, especially corn. The value of corn and soybean production experienced sharp declines, contracting 41% and 18%. And some of the livestock sectors also experienced tough times. And this was noticeable in the fact that Deere didn't sell as much agriculture products as they usually do. And this will, of course, affect both OPM, ROI, and ROE because of their drop in sales.
So the pattern in rates of return and the pattern in profit margins are almost identical.
Yes, sir. Yeah, just as I said, the drop in sales affected both ROI and ROE. Because if you don't have many sales, you're not going to produce as good financial ratios. Very self-explanatory. Next slide, please. So here is the big word. Why do we have so high leverage, and why is the long-term debt so high? Well, the answer lies in the amount of borrowing in the company's captive financing entity. We all know that Deere helps its customers finance its buys, and unlike a bank, which has a low-cost customer deposit base to get loans from, Deere's financial arm issues short and long, medium-term notes as capital sources to finance its customers. And therefore, the long-term debt is so high. Like in 2019, for example, of the company's 30.2 billion long-term debt, 24 billion was issued by its financial services. And that is the reason to why the long-term debt is so high.
Okay. Here we have another one of those interesting charts where if we had formatted the axis, we might get a little different picture on shareholders' equity. But equity's actually grown pretty substantially in recent years. You can see over on the left side, where are we? Maybe $7 billion of equity, whereas on the right side, it's 12. So in that space of time, shareholders' equity ran up $5 billion, which 5 divided by 7, pretty substantial percentage. But you cannot see it because the scale is extended, which makes the line compressed. But just bear in mind that although equity did drop because earnings dropped in 2016 and 17, equity during this decade picked up pretty well. Shareholders may have been disappointed back in 2016, but right now they're probably pretty happy.
And here we can see a drop in leverage that was an increase of a sharply increasing shareholders' equity in 2013. And also that high total invested capital is also because, as I already said, that their financial entity stands for a lot of the long-term debt.
Yeah. The leverage is still 73%, which is not trivial.
No, sir.
So next we have the critical success factor scorecard, which is what separates winners from losers. And as we can see here, John Deere is in a good position. Some things to point out are John Deere's GPS system. Like I already said, they're the most precise on the market, and the system uses technology that tracks all operations precisely. And then another interesting point is Caterpillar's distribution center. They're the industry leader, and they have a greater distribution capability, which isn't surprising since they are the biggest. Then for functions and skills, so strengths, John Deere has a strong financial position, a diverse product portfolio in all categories, and also customable machines to fit all customer needs. They have high customer loyalty, which has grown from the quality of products and services that John Deere offers. They have strong brand awareness across the world. Research and development, steel fabrication, manufacturing. John Deere makes with metallurgy, which has been one of the critical success factors. And then they also have John Deere financial subsidiary, which is a strength because it helps customers to buy John Deere's to afford John Deere's machines. And for the weaknesses, they have a higher cost because of the quality. They want to reach a level of high quality, and they need more investment in new technologies. But yeah, they already do a lot of this. And then limited success outside core business and low foreign market share, like we already talked about. And they also have the problem with high leverage.
Yeah, sure do. What do you mean by limited success outside the core business, Joanna? What sort of things were you thinking about there?
I think it was something about that they weren't doing good with, like, for private users outside of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't think of much either. Of course, the core business is basic, machinery for the industries that they serve: agriculture, construction, and forestry. So, outside the core business would be the use of tracked diesel machines in industries other than their core businesses. And to be honest, there really aren't that many non-core businesses. But if you can think of any, that's where the issue would be. Maybe in off-road highway vehicles and that sort of thing. We do see Deere coming up with some all-terrain vehicles and some other small product lines that are not in the core. So that's conceivably what's meant here. I'm not sure where you got this, but potentially we could eliminate it because it certainly in this presentation, it's hard to imagine non-core businesses being that relevant. Give some thought to whether you'd want to take that bullet out.
Yeah, so for resources, it is very important to have superior operands and operands, and John Deere has superior operands and operands, which is very important in order for them to be successful. John Deere has a big assortment of different products, like we already talked about, global manufacturing locations, global distribution networks, and also the financial subsidiary that helps the customers to buy their machines. The operands, they also have excellent customer service, staff with expertise, and also educated engineers. They also have the reliable warranty services and strong leadership. So if you go to the next slide, that's the operational structure. Right now, we got John C. May as the CEO, like Lynn already mentioned before, and we also see that the operations are divided into 4 different divisions. And further down, we're gonna make a suggestion on what should be changed in this operational structure to reach a higher foreign market share.
For those of you who are unaware of it, Joanna and Ollie are coming, and Joanna and Ollie are coming to us from Sweden. And every once in a while, we lose the signal or the power of the signal. And we could not hear Joanna. In fact, when I put the speaker up to my ear, I could hear Joanna, but the volume, the strength of the signal dropped dramatically.
Can you hear me now?
Now we have her back again, yeah. So
Do you want me to do it again?
the reason is quite simply the distance. It's quite remarkable that that Zoom can accomplish international service like this. Yeah, Joanna, if you care to repeat the points on this slide, I suspect nobody could hear them.
Yeah, so this is John Deere's operational structure right now. We got John C. May as the CEO, like we already mentioned before. We also see that the operations are divided into 4 different divisions. And then further down, we are going to make a suggestion on what should be changed in order to reach a higher foreign market share.
Good.
So for the goals, the next slide is the goals hierarchy. The purpose is simply to show goals that need to reflect the condition of the company. John Deere Agriculture and Forestry are currently in a place where they can focus on long-term growth. Meanwhile, John Deere Construction are at a favorable market position in which they don't have too much leverage and pretty good financial ratios.
Yeah. Again, permit me to make a quick remark for everybody who's listening. This goals hierarchy sort of looks like, I don't know, maybe a piece of artwork or something. In fact, it's very consequential. Depending upon where a firm is on the goals hierarchy will determine the primary focus of strategy. Construction equipment, Deere's construction equipment does a very good job, but there's a leader in that industry, and of course, it's Caterpillar. So Deere is not in a position to think about moving beyond perhaps the kind of construction equipment that it wants to develop, or even basic concepts, because it's still, its strategy is still trying to get a more favorable market position. On the other hand, agriculture equipment and forestry equipment that produced by Deere are unrivaled leaders. So the direction the industry goes in, the standards that other companies will follow are probably going to be set by Deere. The problem, of course, for Deere is it's got to live up to that challenge, and it's got to set the standards with new concepts such as what Joanna mentioned earlier, or perhaps it was Lindsay, about electrically powered machinery with batteries and so forth, very early in the life cycle. But you know, it's up to Deere, if it wants to remain the leader, to set those standards, and that calls for a whole different approach to strategy, such as research and development, in order to remain the first mover. If Deere isn't the first mover, someone else may be, and that could threaten Deere. So Deere may not even want to incur the expenses for all that research and development, but it has no choice because it's at this stage of the goals hierarchy. So very simple diagram with very deep-seated and far-reaching consequences.
So these are the future financial goals, and these projections, we would like to see increase in sales, of course, and we think that John Deere have a great chance of increasing their sales if they manage to increase their international presence in market shares. As an increase in sales, they of course will have a greater chance of increasing their operating margin, which we hope they do. For this one, we hope they have a steady ROI and ROE that will hopefully increase, even though the value line seems to have projected a trend without major happenings. And here for the long-term debt, it will slightly decrease, as well as we hope shareholder equity increase, which brings us to invested capital, but most importantly, leverage. We'd like to see that John Deere decreasing their leverage in order to be able to attack C and H in market that seems to fit and take over the parts of their market shares, just as Ollie mentioned earlier, because that's the company that has the most similar products to what we have, or to what John Deere have.
Good point.
So here is the goals table. This is basically in a table. What we see here is we would like the decreased leverage by 20%, and also the sales to increase by 21%.
And shareholder wealth to grow by almost 70%. Don't forget
Yes.
us poor shareholders.
Yeah.
So this slide, we felt like it was a good idea to put this in it just because of what's happening. So what effect does Corona have on Deere? Currently it's stopping or slowing the sales. Nobody really is doing much work right now. And in 2020, we'll go through a recession, and this will affect the sales, the demand of these products, the heavy equipment, the tractors, the lawn mowers, stuff like that. It will affect the parts distribution and suppliers, whether we're able to even get the products we need to make Deere tractors. And then in 2021, hopefully this will be moving on and they can start to recover from this financial loss.
So I will be going over the strategic objectives and strategy. Switch slide. To sum up this slide that has a lot of text and bullet points, John Deere's generic strategy is a hybrid strategy of differentiation and low cost. It has, first of all, a differentiation strategy. Their basis for competitive advantage is to offer top market products with excellent quality, and they offer innovative products and features, and because of this, they charge higher prices. But Deere's products must still be affordable. With everything that they're doing, their products could be much more expensive than they are today, but then no one would be able to afford them. So John Deere also has a low cost strategy to control their costs. Next slide.
Those points are very well made. And this is a great slide because it really covers the waterfront.
So the strengths and weaknesses Johanna has already gone over. Opportunities for John Deere, I think, is that the population is increasing and that there will be an increased demand for food supplies and housing, which is exactly what John Deere is basing their business on. Also, increased prosperity may make people more able to afford and spend money on Deere's products. And the urbanization is creating the need for better and more infrastructure, which is good for John Deere's construction business. The threats I found to be if raw material price increases, like steel, for example, if any global economic issues occur, or if the environment changes faster than Deere can keep up with and adjust to, because then their products wouldn't be useful or perform well anymore. So two alternatives for Deere is to feed the world or use massive urbanization to their benefit. And actually, I think that Deere has noticed and is trying to push for both of these alternatives. And I think that you might be able to see that too after I've gone over the remaining of the strategy section in this presentation. Next slide.
Yeah, that massive urbanization suggests demand for construction equipment. as opposed to agriculture and alternative one. The alternative two just screams out for more construction equipment related to construction in the city rather than the country.
So the coming slides have a lot of information, so I will just go over these slides in a very compromised way, and then you can go back and
Well,
read the rest of it
let's at
later.
least make sure that we account. Why do we do Ansough's matrix?
Growth strategies.
Yeah, you're right. Say it more definitively. So Ansoff prepared this matrix to enable us to explain how the company has grown in the past or how it intends to grow in the future. Okay.
So the market penetration strategy by Deere is to grow by providing excellent quality and reliability, and also their availability and financial services. Their dealerships have an important role in this, and John Deere supports them in many ways to give their dealerships the foundations to be successful. Next slide. Like Johanna mentioned earlier when going over the CSF scorecard, Deere is good in their research and development. Farm Forward 2.0 is a vision of how Deere's future products will look like, and it includes artificial intelligence, automation, and connectivity. They also have a program called the Science Failure Modes Effects Analysis, which mitigate risks in new product designs, and the rest of the slides are example of possible future products and newly announced products of Deere. Next slide. Market development. John Deere is operating in many different countries and markets worldwide, but they need to expand more. Like we already have mentioned many times already, they need to grow more in developing countries because those have the fastest growing economies and will be more and more important as time goes on. I also want to point out John Deere's location intelligence, which they are not alone to use. Many other big companies are using this too. Anyways, they use AI-based predictive analysis to spot growth opportunities in different markets worldwide by collecting data from locations specifically rather than generalizing their conclusions from an analysis. And then they compare similar locations and how projects in previous similar locations have turned out. And this way they increase the probability for a new dealership to be set up more successfully. Next slide.
I'm impressed by the fact that you obviously did a little research here to come up with that. That's what separates the excellent contributors to these things from everybody else. Good work.
The product proliferation in John Deere's history is included in the next slide, but future growth opportunities include, like you've heard before, agriculture needs and construction needs. I have added some water facts in this slide just to illustrate a problem we have. So in the future, our population will be larger and we have less space. And most of the water we need is fresh water, and that leaves out so much salt water to no use. And if we could effectively make use of the salt water, that would be huge. That's why I added desalination plants and hapophyte cultivation in
What are
slide.
halophytes?
It's plants
tell
that
me?
can
What are
plants that can grow in salt water or like with salt water.
Yeah, these are the if you visited the coast, any coast in the world, along the coast you see plants growing in the water, right? On our Pacific coast, these plants grow very heavily. Halophytes along the west coast of the United States are very thick, and they are in other parts of the world as well. And the animals, like the seals, they eat them. Those are plants. You can eat them just like we eat plants that grow on the land, but they're plants. But as Lynn points out, so much of the earth is covered by salt water that if you could cultivate and harvest plants that grow in salt water, there would be a large increase in food. And we know that the demand for food is going to grow in the next 10 years by about 70%. And here, where those demands are especially large, there is, in fact, lots of salt water. And we're now growing plants in salt water. Halophyte cultivation isn't some pipe dream, it's happening now. But we're not real good at it. Machinery and methods for cultivating plants that grow in salt water are not highly developed, but the scientific community is convinced that halophyte cultivation is one of the ways that we're going to have to develop in order to meet this rather large demand for food and nutrition that exists especially in underdeveloped nations. But it's not just underdeveloped nations. One of the favorite snack foods in China is seaweed. And have you ever gone to a Japanese restaurant and had seaweed on the side? I have. It's good. But that's a halophyte. It's a plant that grows in salt water, and this is a place where this is product proliferation. This is the kind of thing that Deere and its competitors need to push forward in order to accomplish their missions, which is to provide for the nutrition of people all over the world.
So John Deere has only been focusing on related diversification. They started out only providing agriculture equipment, and since then they have expanded to all that you can see on this slide. Next slide. John Deere has acquired many companies in their history. I mentioned some of them when I spoke about John Deere's background, but I would like to add the Blue River technology, which gave Deere access to one of the world's leaders in precision agriculture, and together they are now building the next generation of smart agriculture equipment. And some of the latest acquisitions I could find was Unimill and OnLink. Next slide. So all the ones I mentioned on the last slide are examples of horizontal integration of Deere, and to it might be included new acquisitions in developing markets. Vertical integration, I think, could include their dealerships. Most of them are independently owned, but they're treated like strategic alliances, and their merchandisers are licensed. Next slide.
You are exactly correct about that.
So I would like you to keep this slide in mind when I explain the next slide. Briefly, what we can take away from this illustration is that, for example, less than 1% of the US population is engaged in agriculture, while 25% of the population in India is engaged in agriculture. So this might indicate on that developed and developing countries may need different strategies because the people and businesses have different requirements and abilities to invest in expensive machines and equipment in unique climates and economies and stuff like that. Next slide.
I'm trying. It just wouldn't advance.
So currently, I would classify John Deere as a global company because they have standardized products rather than customized, and they have a consistent global branding, and the local responsiveness is relatively weak. Deere tries to respond to local markets and needs through their dealerships, but at the same time, they don't have much local competition because there are high entry barriers in the industries that Deere is operating in. So considering the last slide and the fact that they need to grow more in developing countries, I think that Deere needs to shift to become a transnational company and respond better to local needs in order to grow in these developing countries.
I think that's the
And
point you made here.
yeah, so you can go on to the next slide.
Okay, sorry, you're moving faster than I am. I wanted to increase the print size.
So for the implementation project and programs to implement change, technology and innovation, John Deere should keep working on their new machines, autonomous tractors, spraying drones in order to keep staying on top of technology and move on. And they should also do market research to identify new customer needs and use that information to make products that suit the customers. Also, continuous improvement of development programs. John Deere should keep developing their management improvement programs to make personnel and management even more experts on their areas. And same goes with the total quality management programs. Just keep improving these to continue detecting and reducing errors in manufacturing, improve customer service, and continuously improve employee training in order to accomplish higher levels of total quality. Also, more acquisitions in new manufacturer location. John Deere should keep making smart and profitable acquisitions, especially in developing markets.
Right.
And here, keep in mind, like Lynn just said, what these customers might need for their needs, and also focus on making each one of major projects, making each one a major project in order to build, in order for it to be successful. And then for the new locations, John Deere should also build more manufacturer locations in order to easier reach international market. And same goes here. Each new location should be a major project.
Absolutely.
And then for the next slide, so here's the organizational structure, and this is how it needs to be adjusted to implement international strategy. Here's the suggestion to implement a division for international operations in order to reach the international market. And by implementing a division for the international market, this division could focus more on actually increasing the international market share and how they're going to do that.
Yeah, of course, the actual division would provide the subdivisions, not just for India and China, but for Europe and South America and so forth. But your point here is we've just got to do a better job in India and China. And so your point is very well made. I'm just putting the footnote in. You're the one that made the important point.
Yeah. So new skills to required to implement the strategy. More marketing focus in India and China, and industrials in parts of Africa. We talked a lot about this, and also knowledge about foreign market needs, like Lynn just talked about. What will these customers need, because they have other needs, because they might not be as well developed as the United States. And then also waiting for the improvement of government relations, like Lindsay touched on earlier, because of the trade war between US and China. Also continuous development of the electrical engines for the future, because this will be very important in the future, and John Deere wants to step in on this market before anyone else does, or fairly early. And also continuous development of new sustainable ways of agriculture, because this is the future and it's very important already. And for the next generation being more environmentally interested and aware, this is going to be really important.
Yeah, it's even more than just social concern. Back to the halophytes, 70% increase in food requirements in a very short space of time. How do you do that? How do you do that? Well, Deere has to concern itself with that, and halophytes just happen to be one of the ways that are a dramatic difference. We don't need, continuous development is good, but what we're not looking for, or we are looking for continuous, gradual improvement, but we're also looking for dramatic concept changes, and there aren't that many. It's hard to figure them out. Halophytes just happen to be one.
So the leadership required, John C. May must keep John Deere committed to success of dealers and customers. Each division needs their objectives aligned with the corporation goals. And like we already talked about, the new international division and president for international operations should be implemented in order to start experience more success on the international market.
So here's a conclusion of what we have talked about in this presentation. John Deere is an overall well-performing company that is a top competitor in many of its industries in which they operate in. To maintain or improve its current position, they need to develop a better international strategy and adjust and extend organization structure into attractive markets. They also need to invest in innovation to satisfy future needs in agriculture, business, construction, and forestry, where there will be more people and less space. And I think all this relates to their mission that they promote as a company. Yeah.
I think that's it, isn't it? No, one more. That's it. Yeah.
That's it.
Wow. I'm going to stop the recording here pretty quickly because we've got a really large file here. But I definitely do want to record that this was a superb presentation that really covered a lot of important points. And I hope a lot of people out there in cyberspace get a chance to look at this presentation, because it really hit so many very important points. And to be honest with you, I hope there's somebody in Moline, Illinois at John Deere who looks at it too, because it's a pretty comprehensive review. And I doubt that the people at Deere would I don't know who's got that bird in the outside their window, but mute your microphone, would you? Who is it? Lynn, do you have your? Somebody's got a bird in the background. Sounds nice. It's a nice bird. But anyway, I doubt that the folks at Moline would disagree with virtually anything in this presentation. I think this presentation is right. But I do think that even the guys at Moline would look at this and just be reminded about how important it is for Deere to get its international act together. The people at Moline would tell you, well, we have an international act and we are doing things internationally. And although they are doing them, we go back to that pie chart and we've got 87%, or sorry, 90, almost 89% of their business outside of developing nations. So they may be doing things, but the securities analysts would look at Deere and say, you may be doing things, but so far they haven't been successful enough. And that's really a a dramatic kind of a statement because Deere is a highly competent corporation, one of the best in the world, and it does great work. It feeds, it is responsible for feeding millions and millions of people and making the best equipment of its categories. And yet, from a social perspective, from a standpoint of global requirements to meet the needs of people around the world, not enough. So lots of room for Deere and its competitors to take steps forward. In any event, I said I was going to stop this recording, so I'm going to do that now. But I simply want to repeat again that I think this was just a superb piece of work.